A 58-year-old man with 2 divorces behind him opened a dating app for the last time in March of 2025. He looked at the screen for 11 seconds. Not at a profile. Not at a message. Just at the grid of faces and the little notification badge telling him someone had liked him. 11 seconds. Then he closed the app, deleted it, and when his therapist asked him about it that Thursday, he said 4 words. "I'm done trying." And he didn't say it the way you say it after a bad date. He said it the way you say it after 25 years of data finally becomes undeniable. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 things that finally broke older men from modern dating. Not based on opinion. Not based on one guy's bad experience. Based on conversations with over 40 men aged 49 to 67, 3 matchmakers who agreed to speak on background, and the dating app data that nobody is putting in their press releases. This isn't a complaint video. This isn't a war between the sexes video. This is an audit. Older men ran the numbers, financial, emotional, time, legal, and quietly closed the file. And here's what should get your attention. The men in this video aren't bitter. Most of them are the calmest they've been in 30 years. And that calm is exactly what should make women, and younger men, pay attention. If you're an older man feeling like the world has been gaslighting you about what dating became, this is the validation you didn't know you needed. If you're a woman wondering where the men your age went, this is the answer nobody on the apps will give you. And if you're a younger man watching this, pay close attention, because this is the playbook your father was too tired to write down. And the first thing that broke them? It wasn't a woman. It wasn't a date. It was a spreadsheet. Something quiet started happening in 2024. By the middle of 2025, it was undeniable. But here's the strange part. It wasn't happening in one city. It wasn't one demographic. It was everywhere all at once, and nobody was coordinating it. A matchmaker outside Dallas, been in the business 22 years, told me she'd never seen anything like it. Her male client list for men 55 and older dropped 40% in a single year. Not because they found someone. Not because they switched to a different service. They just stopped calling. Stopped renewing. Stopped showing up to the intake appointments they'd already scheduled. At first she thought it was pricing. Then she thought it was the economy. So she picked up the phone and called a few of them. And the answer she got back wasn't what she expected. They hadn't found someone. They hadn't given up in frustration. They'd made a decision. Quietly. Deliberately. The way you make a decision you've been putting off for 10 years and suddenly can't put off for one more day. Now, you'd think the dating apps would tell a different story. They won't. Not publicly. But privately, the numbers say the same thing. A data analyst at one of the major platforms, couldn't use their name or the companies, told me something that stopped me cold. Active engagement for men over 50 didn't just decline. It flatlined. And here's what made it different from anything they'd tracked before. Normally, when users leave, there's a pattern. They slow down, swipe less, go quiet for a few weeks, come back after a lonely Friday night, cycle in and out. It's like a gym membership, you stop going but you keep paying because you might go back. These men didn't cycle. They canceled the membership, threw away the card, and never looked at the building again. Clean. Final. The analyst said one word that stuck with me. Gone. So that's 2 sources saying the same thing. But I wanted a third perspective. Someone who sits across from these men and hears what they actually say when nobody else is listening. A therapist in Chicago gave me exactly that. She said she used to have 12 male clients over 50, who came specifically to work on relationships, how to communicate better, how to be more open, how to navigate dating after divorce. Last year, 8 of those 12 shifted their goals entirely. Didn't announce it, didn't make a speech about it, just walked into a session and said some version of the same sentence. I don't want to fix my dating life anymore. I want to learn how to be okay without one. 8 out of 12. No coordination between them. No book they all read. No podcast they all heard. Something in the water had changed, and these men all tasted it at the same time. And that raised a question I couldn't ignore. What exactly did they taste? So I went to the source. Not therapists. Not matchmakers. The men themselves. 40 of them. Different cities, different incomes, different stories. And the first thing every single one of them brought up before I even asked was the same thing. The math. Here's what nobody warns you about when it comes to men over 50 and dating. At some point, every one of them sits down. Not with a therapist. Not with a friend. With themselves. And they do something they probably should have done 20 years earlier. They add it up. Not in some dramatic accounting session, although one of them actually did build a spreadsheet, printed it out, stuck it on his fridge, and told me it was the most clarifying thing he'd done in a decade. But most of them do it the same way. Lying in bed at 2 a.m., or sitting in the car after another first date that went nowhere, or staring at a credit card statement that looks exactly like the one from 6 months ago, with the same restaurant charges for women they'd never see again. And when the total comes into focus, it hits them in 3 waves. Money first, then time, then something deeper that most of them couldn't even name until it was over. Want to know what the financial number looks like? One man, 61, retired military, sat down and estimated what he'd spent on dating in the 18 years since his divorce. Dinners and drinks that went nowhere. New clothes because the last woman told him he dressed like he didn't care. Subscriptions to 3 different apps running simultaneously. A matchmaker who charged $4,500 upfront. And produced exactly 2 dates, both dead on arrival. Weekend trips to cities 3 hours away because the local pool had dried up. Gifts for birthdays he'd never celebrate a second time. Concert tickets for shows he sat through like a hostage. He put the number at somewhere around $180,000. He said it out loud to me and then went quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said something I wrote down word for word. I spent more trying to find love after 50 than I spent on my first house. And I got less for it. That number alone would be enough to make a man reconsider. But money was only the first wave. Because every one of these men also did the time math. And brother, the time math is the one that really breaks you. One man, 62, semi-retired accountant, actually ran it like a client engagement. 6 hours a week on average. Not 6 hours of romance. 6 hours of logistics. Swiping through profiles that all said the same thing. Messaging back and forth for days to set up a date that might get canceled 2 hours before. Getting ready. Driving across town. Sitting through dinner with someone you know within 4 minutes isn't going to work. But you stay for 90 because you were raised to be polite. Driving home in silence. Processing the disappointment. Convincing yourself to try again on Monday. 6 hours a week. For 8 years. That's 2,500 hours. He told me he could have learned to play piano. Could have built a cabin with his hands. Could have just sat in his backyard in total silence and been happier than any of those 2,500 hours ever made him. Think about that. 2,500 hours. That's not dating. That's a part-time job with no paycheck and no benefits. Now here's where it gets heavy. Because money you can earn back. Time you can redirect. But there's a third cost these men carry, and it's the one they don't say out loud easily. The emotional cost. And unlike money or time, this one doesn't just add up. It compounds. In the wrong direction. A therapist I spoke with used a phrase that stopped me cold. She called it emotional compound interest in reverse. Think about it like a muscle that keeps getting torn in the same spot. The first time it tears, it heals in a few weeks. The second time takes longer. By the 5th or 6th tear, scar tissue has built up so thick the muscle barely moves anymore. That's what happens to trust in a man over 50 who keeps opening himself up and getting the same result. At 35, a bad breakup costs you 3 months and some sad playlists. At 55, a bad breakup costs you something you can't quite name but can absolutely feel. Some piece of willingness that doesn't grow back all the way. Multiply that by 5, 10, 15 attempts over 2 decades. And what you get isn't bitterness. It's exhaustion. The specific, bone-deep exhaustion of a man who kept putting coins into a machine that never paid out. And when you stack all 3, money, time, emotion, and you see the total, something happens that nobody prepares you for. You don't get angry. You don't get sad. You just close the file. The way you close a business that hasn't turned a profit in 20 years. Not with drama. Not with tears. With arithmetic. One man told me nobody cries when they shut down a bad investment. They just stop writing checks. That's all I did. But here's the thing. The audit was only the first breaking point. The second one was something they couldn't put on a spreadsheet. Something they could only feel. And for almost every man I talked to, it crystallized in the same place. On a date. Every man I spoke with had a last date story. Not the worst date. Not the most dramatic. Just the last one. The one where something clicked off inside and didn't click back on. A 57-year-old in Phoenix told me his. He'd met a woman through a friend of a friend. Smart. Attractive. Seemed genuinely interested. Third date, dinner at a nice restaurant. Everything going well. Then halfway through the entree, the questions changed. What was his pension? Did he own or rent? Had he thought about long-term care insurance? Specific questions. Detailed questions. The kind of questions you hear from an accountant, not a dinner companion. He sat there with his fork in his hand and thought, this isn't a date. This is a job interview. And I'm not the one hiring. That's the moment the risk calculation kicks in. And once it starts, brother, it does not stop. Because at 55, 60, 65, the assets you've spent your entire working life building, your pension, your house, your savings, that's not extra money. That's your runway. That's the difference between a comfortable retirement and a desperate one. And every one of these men eventually had a conversation, some with a lawyer, some with a financial planner, some just with the ceiling at 3 a.m., where the math became impossible to ignore. One man, 61, told me his divorce lawyer laid it out like this. At your age, with what you've built, A new marriage is the single highest risk financial move you could make. And unlike any other investment, you can't cap the downside. You want to know the real reason men over 55 stop dating? It's not heartbreak. It's that one sentence from a lawyer. But it wasn't just the money. Something happened that none of them expected. Their bodies started telling them the truth before their minds caught up. A 59-year-old in Colorado told me that 3 months after he stopped dating entirely, his blood pressure dropped 15 points. His doctor asked if he'd switched medication. He hadn't. He'd switched priorities. Sleeping through the night for the first time in years. No anxiety about the phone buzzing. No lying awake rehearsing text messages. No cortisol spike every time a notification came through. His cardiovascular system responded to the removal of dating stress the same way it would respond to quitting a toxic substance. Because that's exactly what it was. And then there's the part that sounds simple but closes the door forever. At 35, if a relationship blows up your finances, you have 30 years to recover. You can rebuild. You can start over. At 60, one man put it cleaner than anything I've heard. At 35, a bad relationship costs you 5 years. At 60, a bad relationship costs you the rest. No do-over. No second chance. Whatever you lose at this age stays lost. So they ran the numbers on everything. The financial exposure. The legal risk. The health data. The time they have left. And when all the columns came back red, dating wasn't a close call. It was the worst deal on the table. Not because they stopped wanting connection. Because connection, at this stage, came wrapped in a contract they couldn't afford to sign. Now, the first breaking point was the audit. They did the math. The second was the risk. They felt it in their bodies, saw it in the fine print, and understood they couldn't absorb another hit. Those two alone would be enough for most people to walk away from anything. But the men I talked to all told me the same thing. Those weren't what finally broke them. The third thing was, and this is the reason I made this video, because this is the one that changes the entire conversation. There's a moment. If you've lived it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The moment you realize that the feeling of something being wrong with you, the one you've been carrying around your entire adult life like a stone in your pocket, isn't yours. You didn't put it there. It was put there for you. By every well-meaning friend who told you the right one is still out there. By every family member who asked when you're going to settle down again. As if your life without a partner was a waiting room, not a destination. By every article that said men who live alone die younger. As if loneliness and solitude were the same word. They're not. One is a prison. The other is a country house with a lock on the inside. A 59-year-old outside Boston described it to me, and I haven't been able to shake it since. He said, I spent 25 years believing I was the problem. Every failed relationship. Every date that went nowhere. Every woman who lost interest after 3 weeks. I took all of it personally. I must be too boring. Too quiet. Too set in my ways. Not ambitious enough. Not tall enough. Not interesting enough. 25 years of that story running in his head like a news ticker he couldn't turn off. Then he stopped dating. Completely. 6 months, no apps, no setups, no effort. And something happened that he was not prepared for. He became the most peaceful, productive, clear-headed version of himself he'd been in decades. Better sleep. More energy. More focused at work. More present with his friends. More himself than he'd been since his 30s. And that's when the real breaking point hit. Not a realization about dating. A realization about the story. The problem was never him. The problem was the thing he kept being told to chase. That's the gaslighting. And I used that word deliberately. When an entire culture tells a man that his peace, his stability, his contentment, his preference for quiet evenings, his financial security, his emotional steadiness, all of it is just evidence that he hasn't found the right person yet, that's not encouragement. That's erasure. You're looking at a man who is telling you clearly with his whole life, I am well. And you're responding, no you're not, you just don't know it yet. You're telling him his own eyes are lying to him. And every single man I talked to described the same turning point. The loneliest I ever felt was in a relationship. The most connected I've ever felt is right now, alone, choosing who I spend time with and when. They're sleeping better, exercising more, seeing friends more often, not less. Every measurable indicator of well-being went up the moment they stopped doing the thing the entire world told them they needed to do to be well. One of the matchmakers confirmed it from her side. And what she said was the most telling thing I heard in this entire investigation. She said, the men who leave aren't the angry ones. The angry ones stay. They keep swiping, keep complaining, keep paying. The ones who leave are the ones who got quiet. They stopped arguing with the story. They didn't fight it. They just stepped out of it. Like a man walking out of a loud room, gently closing the door behind him, and realizing the hallway is the most peaceful place he's been in years. The moment that finally broke them wasn't when they realized dating wasn't worth it. It was when they gave themselves permission, for the first time in their entire adult lives, to trust what they already knew over what everyone else kept telling them they should feel. That's the break. Not from women, not from love, from the lie that said they were incomplete without it. So what happens on the other side? I asked every one of them, and the answer was so consistent it was almost unsettling. You'd expect 40 different men to describe 40 different lives. They didn't. The word they used most wasn't happiness, wasn't freedom, wasn't even peace, although peace came up a lot. The word that came up more than any other across 40 men in different cities with different stories was calm. Just calm. A 63-year-old in Portland said something that captured it better than I could. He said, "I wake up and the first thing I feel is nothing. And that nothing is the best thing I've ever felt." He wasn't being poetic. He was being precise. He was describing the absence of dread. The absence of scanning the room for someone else's mood. The absence of wondering what emotional obstacle course was waiting between the front door and the couch. Nothing. Just morning. Just quiet. Just his. But here's what surprised me. They didn't just find calm. They built something with it. And this is the part that makes the skeptics go quiet. One man started going to the gym for the first time in 15 years, not because a doctor told him to, but because nobody was rushing him out the door in the morning. Another started cooking elaborate meals on weeknights, not for anyone, just because he wanted to see if he could make a decent risotto on a Tuesday. A third man told me his monthly expenses dropped by a third, but his satisfaction with his own life tripled. Not because he got richer, because he stopped funding a lifestyle that was never his to begin with. And here's something I didn't expect. Younger men are finding them. Men in their 30s and 40s, still in relationships, still in the dating market, reaching out on forums and comment sections asking the question that scares them. Should I get out now? A 63-year-old told me what he says to every single one of them. I tell them what I wish someone had told me at 40. Pay attention to what your peace costs you. If your relationship is the most expensive thing in your life, and I don't mean money, you already have your answer. That sentence should terrify anyone who isn't paying attention, because it means this isn't a generational exit. It's a warning signal that's echoing downward. And if you're a woman watching this, wondering where the men your age went, here's the answer nobody on the apps will give you. They didn't disappear. They didn't break. They recalculated. They looked at the total cost, the risk, the time, the emotional overhead, the legal exposure, and they made the same call any rational person would make when the return on investment has been negative for 2 decades. They chose themselves. And for many of them, it was the first time they'd ever been allowed to. But there's one more thing. Because the men who talked to me all said something at the end that I wasn't prepared for. And it's the part that should make every single person watching this, man or woman, young or old, stop and think. These men aren't bitter. I need you to hear that because it changes everything. Not one of them said anything hateful about women. Not one of them described this as revenge. Not one of them was gloating. What they said, almost to a man, right before we hung up, was some version of the same quiet sentence. I wish it didn't have to be this way. That's not anger, brother. That's grief. The kind of grief that only comes from a man who wanted something badly enough to chase it for 30 years, and mature enough to finally admit the chase was costing him more than the thing was worth. They're not celebrating. They're mourning a version of the world that doesn't exist anymore. And the fact that they can do that without bitterness, without rage, without blaming anyone, tells you more about these men than any statistic ever could. Because what they see from the vantage point of 50, 60, 65 years on this planet is something bigger than their own story. They see a system that stopped working for everybody. Dating became transactional. Expectations on both sides drifted apart until they stopped overlapping entirely. The economics shifted. The legal framework shifted. The emotional labor got redistributed in ways that left both sides feeling shortchanged. Nobody won. These men just happened to be the first ones to look at the scoreboard honestly. One man, 64, put it like this. This isn't men versus women. This is everybody losing. We're just the ones who looked at the score and walked off the court. And if you're 35 or 40 and watching this, I need to be direct with you. This is not your destiny, but it is your warning. Every pattern these men describe started long before 55. It started at 30 and compounded for 25 years. The quiet compromises you make to avoid a fight. The slow erosion of your own priorities because hers always seemed more urgent. The financial drift toward spending that serves the relationship instead of serving your actual life. The friends you stopped calling. The hobbies you dropped. The version of yourself you shelved because it created too much friction. All of it starts small. All of it adds up. And by the time you notice, the total is 6 figures and 2,500 hours and a blood pressure reading your doctor can't explain. You still have time to build something different, but you need to see the road clearly. And the men in this video, they just drew you a map. The men in this video aren't the broken ones. The broken ones are the men still performing, still pretending, still trading their peace for someone else's approval at an exchange rate that stopped making sense a decade ago. These men stopped performing, and the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was the first honest sound they'd heard in years. They didn't walk away from love. They walked toward clarity. And brother, they are never going back. One question I ask in every video, and I'm asking you right now. What was your breaking point? The moment you stopped trying. The moment the math finally landed. The moment you gave yourself permission to trust what you already knew. Drop it in the comments. Be honest. Be specific. The best answers become the next video. And if you know a man who's still sitting in that car in the parking lot, still running the numbers in his head but hasn't given himself permission yet, send him this. This is part of an ongoing series on older men, modern relationships, and the quiet 2026 reset. Subscribe if this is the conversation you've been looking for. See you in the next one, brother. Take care.